Our group decided to do the second part of the musculoskeletal system. One of the bones in this section is a clavicle. The clavicle articulates with the sternum and the humerus. Another bone in this section is the scapula. The scapula is sometimes called the shoulder blade and is comprised of many structures. The glenoid cavity is a shallow fossa where the head of the humerus articulates with the scapula. The coracoid process is a projection from the same region of bone supporting the glenoid cavity. The subscapular fossa is a large smooth depression on the anterior surface of the scapula. The posterior surface of the scapula is divided by a thin wall of bone. This wall is the spine. The acromion is a projection of bone that juts anteriorly from the spine of the scapula. The supraspinous fossa is a depression formed by the superior surface of the spinous process and the posterior face of the scapula. The infraspinous fossa is a depression formed by the inferior surface of the spinous process and the posterior face of the scapula. The superior border runs from the glenoid cavity laterally to the superior angle medially. The medial border runs from the superior angle down to the inferior angle, and the lateral border runs from the glenoid cavity down to the inferior angle. The last bone of this section is the humerus, and it is found in the upper arm. It is also comprised of many structures. The head is a smooth round cap that articulates with the scapula. The greater tubercle is the lateral and larger bump on the proximal head of the humerus. The lesser tubercle is the smaller bump. The intratubercle sulcus is the small groove between the tubercles. The deltoid tuberosity is the rough region on the lateral part of the shaft that provides an attachment point for a muscle. The capitulum is a round, smooth structure that is part of the distal head. The trochlea is the smooth, spool-shaped structure right next to the capitulum on the distal head. And the radial groove is a shallow depression for the radial nerve.
The first muscle we discussed in this lab was the rhomboid major. It is a rectangular shaped muscle, as you can see in this image, and its medial attachment point is the spinous process of the thoracic vertebrae from T2 to T5, as you can see in this image. Its lateral attachment point is the medial border of the scapula, which is found right here. The next muscle we discussed was the levator scapula, a flattened cylinder with multiple superior attachment points. The superior and medial attachment of the levator scapula is the transverse process of cervical vertebrae from C1 through C4. So C1, 2, 3, and 4, and its inferior lateral attachment is the medial border of the scapula. You can see that on both sides. The next muscle is the trapezius, which is a large, flat, triangular muscle that spreads along the back. The first region is the superior portion of the trapezius. Its lateral attachment is the acromion process of the scapula, and its medial attachment is the cervical vertebrae and occipital bone of the skull, which is indicated right here. The middle part of the trapezius, this portion, the lateral attachment is the scapular spine, and its medial attachment is the thoracic vertebrae. Finally, the inferior portion of the trapezius, the lateral attachment is the medial portion of the scapula, the scapular spine, and the other attachment area is the lower thoracic vertebrae. Next, the pectoralis major is a large, flat, fan-shaped muscle. Its medial attachment point is the clavicle, which then goes down into the sternum, ultimately connecting to the costal cartilage, which can be found in this section. Its lateral attachment is the greater tubercle and shaft of the humerus, which you can see in this image. And then in this image, it shows you the pectoralis major in relation to the deltoid muscle and other muscles. Finally, the deltoid, which is a thick, triangular shaped muscle, has a superior and inferior attachment point. The superior attachment point can be found on the clavicle, the acromion process, and the scapular spine, and the inferior attachment point is located on the deltoid tuberosity of the humerus shaft.
Okay, to start off, we're going to talk about the rhomboid major. So its job is to retract the scapula and rotate it to depress glenoid cavity. On the image at the right, we see a woman performing a yoga pose with her arms crossed in front of her. Her shoulder blades are pulled around the front of her body, lengthening the rhomboid major for a perfect stretch. Okay, the next muscle presented here is the levator scapula. Its job is to elevate the scapula and rotate it downwards. On the image at the right, we can see a very common stretch. By leaning in the other direction, it pulls the scapula down, and it puts it into a range lock into place. This is a perfect stretch if you're feeling any tension there. Okay, the following muscle we have here is the trapezius. Its job is to raise, descend, and rotate the scapula, as well as extend the head. On the right, we see a girl bending her head down. This is a very common movement we do every day. She's performing a unilateral contraction, which bends the head to the ipsilateral side, also known as lateral flexion. The next muscle presented here is the pectoralis major. Now its job is to flex, adduct, and medially rotate the humerus. In the image of the right, it's a very common movement we do every day. When your arm is in a flexed position, like in this image, this part of the pectoralis major muscle will perform extension of the humerus back to the anatomical position. Now for the last muscle we have presented here, we have the deltoid. Its job has three parts. The anterior part flexes, the middle part abducts the arm, and the posterior part extends. On the image of the right, this is a very common exercise we do every day, reaching your arms out in front of you. It focuses on the anterior part of the deltoid, performing shoulder flexion.
So I'm going to be talking about two activities that involve the muscles that we went over in the second musculoskeletal lab. So the first motion I'm going to talk about is a golf swing. So there's two parts of this motion, the back swing and the front swing. And so for the back swing, we talked about a couple of the muscles that are involved in this action, and those were the upper trapezius, the middle trapezius, the rhomboid major, and the levator scapulae. So during the backswing, the upper trapezius rotates the scapula upwards, and the middle trapezius retracts the scapula. The rhomboid major also retracts the scapula, so these motions just help move the scapula toward the spine. And then the levator scapulae helps to elevate the scapula. So in the forward swing, the muscles that we talked about that are involved are the serratus anterior and the pectoralis major. And during this motion, your serratus anterior protracts the scapula, which helps move the scapula away from the spine. And the pectoralis major internally rotates and adducts the humerus. So this just helps bring the arms down from your backswing position so you can follow through and hit the ball. So the second action I'm going to talk about is a push-up. And the muscles that we went over involved in a push-up are the anterior deltoid, the pectoralis major, and your serratus anterior. So in the motion of a push-up, your anterior deltoid horizontally adducts the shoulder. So this just helps move your arms closer to your chest when you push up. The anterior deltoid also internally rotates the humerus, which also helps during the pushing up part. Your pectoralis major horizontally adducts the shoulder too. So again, just helping push off the ground. And your serratus anterior protracts the scapula. So it pulls your shoulder blade forward and around the rib cage while you're pushing up. So all of these together help you get the strength to push off the ground. And then they also help keep you strong to slowly lower yourself onto the ground again.